Could you survive a Roman legion? Think carefully before you answer. We're not just talking about bloody battles or endless marches under the scorching sun. We're talking about living under a ruthless code of honor, where military discipline wasn't just a rule, it was a sentence, where loyalty to the Roman Empire was worth more than life itself, and courage was measured not by the fear one felt, but by the ability to ignore it completely. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover may surprise you. Imagine yourself surrounded by hundreds of soldiers in perfect formation, each trained to obey without hesitation, march without question, and fight to their last breath. The sound of sandals hitting the ground in sync, the gleam of armor reflecting the sun, and the hard stares of men who knew that any slip-up could cost not only their own lives, but those of their comrades. This was the daily life of a Roman legionary. Have you ever been in a situation where the pressure was so intense that even breathing seemed a challenge? For these warriors, this was the norm. The Roman legion's code of honor wasn't just a formality. It was a sacred pact, sealed with blood, sweat, and fear. The military oath, known as sacrament, demanded absolute obedience to the emperor and his commanders. There was no room for doubt or weakness. A Roman soldier could not simply make a mistake. A mistake could mean public flogging, humiliating demotion, or, in extreme cases, the dreaded Decimatio, a collective punishment in which 1 in 10 soldiers was executed by their own comrades. Can you imagine living under that kind of pressure? But it wasn't just fear that maintained order. There was also a cult of loyalty and courage. Being brave wasn't an option, it was a requirement. Soldiers who demonstrated bravery in combat could receive decorations, such as the civic crown or corona muralis, symbols of honor that elevated the warrior's status within the legion. Glory was the fuel that drove these men, and shame was the poison that destroyed them. What would you do if your honor was at stake before thousands of eyes? Roman military discipline was so rigid that even the most trivial details were regulated. The way soldiers dressed, how they marched, how they behaved off the battlefield, everything was monitored. Even the way to tie one's sandals had specific rules. Does that sound exaggerated? For Rome, it was a matter of survival. Order was what separated victory from defeat, the empire from ruin. And don't think this rigidity was just for show. It was tested in the field, in battles against fierce enemies, in unfamiliar territories, under extreme conditions. Discipline was what allowed a Roman legion to face larger armies and emerge victorious. It was what transformed ordinary men into war machines. What you'll see below is how this code shaped every aspect of a soldier's life, from brutal training to the most severe punishments. Prepare to delve into a universe where honor was more valuable than gold, and discipline was the thin line between glory and death. Because now, we'll understand how this system worked in practice. And as you absorb all this, you might be wondering, how could ordinary men live under such pressure, surrounded by rigid rules, severe punishments, and an almost sacred cult of loyalty and courage? It's precisely this question that connects us, because deep down, we've all faced moments when discipline, fear, or honor have put us to the test. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what has touched you most so far. It could be a reflection, a question, or even a comparison with something you've experienced. Your experience may inspire others watching as well. By the way, if you're enjoying this journey through the world of Roman warriors, don't forget to leave a like. It really helps keep this content alive and relevant. And if you want to continue exploring this fascinating world, full of epic stories, historical curiosities, and lessons that span the centuries, subscribe to the channel. Your participation is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this kind of content. It's like forming a modern legion, where each member contributes their strength, vision, and presence. Now that you understand the weight this code of honor carried, let's dive even deeper. Honor, for the Romans, was not an abstract idea or a decorative virtue. It was a concrete, almost palpable force that shaped decisions, behaviors, and even destinies. Living with honor meant living in accordance with the values of eternal Rome: courage, loyalty, discipline, and obedience. And for the soldiers of the legions, this concept took on an even more intense form: sacrament, the military oath that sealed absolute commitment to the emperor and the legion. It wasn't just a formality before training. It was a profound transformation in the warrior's mindset, a watershed moment between the common man and the Roman soldier. This oath allowed no loopholes. By uttering it, the legionnaire promised to obey orders without question, protect his comrades with his life, and never abandon the battlefield, even in the face of death. The psychological impact of this pact was immense. From that moment on, the soldier ceased to belong to himself. His identity became defined by the collective, the mission, and loyalty to the empire. What seemed like a simple phrase spoken aloud actually carried a hidden truth, that individual freedom was sacrificed in the name of something greater. Can you imagine the weight of that? Behind the scenes of Roman glory, there was an invisible structure sustained by this code. It maintained order amidst the chaos of battle, prevented desertions, and allowed men to face outnumbered enemies without hesitation. Sacrament, it wasn't just a promise, it was a voluntary imprisonment where the pride of service overcame the fear of death, and this generated a profound transformation in the way the soldiers viewed their own existence. Life ceased to be a personal journey and became a collective mission. The most fascinating thing is to see how this oath shaped even the smallest gestures, the way a soldier stood before a superior, how he responded to an order, how he behaved off the battlefield. Everything was influenced by this pact. Discipline was enforced not only by written rules, but by an internal culture that valued honor above any comfort. It was as if each legionnaire carried within them an invisible code, guiding them even when no one was looking. And this culture didn't emerge out of thin air. It was cultivated from the earliest days of training, reinforced by rituals, speeches, and living examples. Veterans served as role models for the newcomers, demonstrating that true strength lay not just in muscles or weapons, but in the ability to stand firm in the face of adversity. Courage was celebrated, but loyalty was venerated, and this created an atmosphere where honor wasn't just desired, it was demanded. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic because understanding the sacrament, this is just the beginning. There's a network of decisions, strategies, and punishments that underpin this system, revealing the true impact of Roman discipline on the construction of one of the greatest empires in history. But before we continue, let me tell you, I'm on this journey too. I want to know who's diving deep into this story with me. The command structure within the Roman legions was more than a simple military organization. It was a precise mechanism, where each piece knew exactly its role and never dared to step out of line. The hierarchy was relentless, and understanding how it worked is essential to grasping the true impact of Roman discipline. It wasn't just about who gave orders and who obeyed. It was a network of absolute authority, sustained by respect, fear, and a collective mentality that valued order above any individuality. At the top of the pyramid were the generals, men chosen not only for their strategic skill, but also for their loyalty to the Senate, or the emperor. They were the architects of campaigns, responsible for decisions that could change the course of history. Below them were the tribunes, high-ranking officers who acted as intermediaries between the generals and the soldiers. Many tribunes were young aristocrats at the beginning of their political careers, and although not all had combat experience, their presence strengthened the bond between the army and the central power of Rome. But it was in the centurions that the true strength of the hierarchy manifested itself. These men were the pillars of discipline within the legions. Responsible for commanding around 80 soldiers, centurions were feared and respected. They had the authority to punish, reward, and even execute if necessary. They were chosen for merit, for bravery in battle, for their ability to maintain order even in the most chaotic moments. And most impressively, many centurions came from the lowest strata of society, which made their rise a true personal transformation, a journey of self-improvement and achievement within the Roman system. The relationship between soldiers and their superiors was marked by almost blind obedience. There was no room for questioning. An order given by a centurion was carried out immediately, without hesitation. And this dynamic stemmed not only from fear, but from a deeply ingrained culture where authority was seen as a reflection of Rome itself. Disobeying a superior was tantamount to dishonoring the empire. This mentality created an environment where every decision was made with precision, every move calculated, and every failure severely punished. Behind the scenes of this structure, there was also a strategic logic. The division into centuries, cohorts, and legions allowed the army to operate efficiently in any terrain, under any conditions. It was as if Rome had created a living organism, capable of adapting, reacting, and winning. And all of this was only possible because each level of the hierarchy functioned like a synchronized gear, driven by a code of honor that brooked no error. Interestingly, this hierarchy wasn't limited to the battlefield. It extended to the soldiers' daily lives, influencing everything from their diet to their behavior in times of peace. The centurion wasn't just a commander, he was a constant authority figure, shaping the mindset of the men under his command. This created a culture of discipline that transcended physical training. It was an internal transformation, where the soldier learned to think as part of a whole, to act with purpose, and to accept that his life belonged to the legion. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because understanding the hierarchy is only part of the equation. There's a dark side to this structure, a system of punishments that reveals the hidden truth behind the Roman order. But before I go any further, comment, this makes sense to me. I want to know who's following this journey closely and truly immersing themselves in this universe. A Roman legionary's training wasn't just physical preparation, it was a true shaping of the soul. Rome didn't just want strong soldiers, it wanted men molded to withstand the impossible, ready to face the enemy with a conviction that went beyond brute force. And this began long before the first battle. The training camp was the stage where a profound transformation began, where each movement, repeated to exhaustion, had a greater purpose: to extinguish human frailty and ignite the flame of absolute discipline. The physical exercises were intense, almost inhuman. Marches of up to 30 kilometers in full armor, runs under the scorching sun, simulated combat with wooden swords heavier than real ones. All of this was part of the daily routine. The logic was simple and brutal. If the body could withstand more than necessary, it wouldn't fail when truly called upon. But what few realize is that this physical exertion was only superficial. The real impact was on the mind. The grueling repetition served not only to strengthen muscles, but to shape the warrior's mindset. It was as if each workout erased a bit of doubt, fear, and hesitation. Behind the scenes of this process, sophisticated psychological engineering took place. Legionnaires were exposed to extremely stressful situations, requiring them to make quick decisions under pressure. They were trained to remain calm in the face of chaos, to trust their comrades and superiors blindly, and to act with precision even when everything around them seemed to be falling apart. This mental preparation was what separated a common soldier from a true Roman warrior. It was what allowed entire legions to maintain formation even under a hail of arrows, even when the ground shook with the approach of enemy elephants. The use of heavy weapons in training also served a strategic purpose. Wooden swords, reinforced shields, spears with extra weight. All of this made actual combat seem lighter by comparison. When the soldier finally wielded his gladius in battle, it felt almost like a natural extension of his body. This overloading technique was a revelation for many recruits, who realized that the suffering of training was actually an investment in survival. And more than that, it was a way to build confidence. Knowing that his body could withstand more than necessary gave the legionnaire a psychological advantage over the enemy. But there was also an emotional aspect to this process. Many of these men came from humble backgrounds with no prospect of social advancement. Joining the army was a decision that changed everything. It was a chance to earn respect, glory, land, and above all, identity. The brutal training wasn't just a physical requirement, it was a rite of passage. It was there that a man left behind his personal history and assumed the role of defender of Rome. And this transformation was celebrated, reinforced by rituals, symbols, and rewards that gave meaning to the pain. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because understanding the training is only the beginning. There's a system of rigid rules that underpinned this structure, and it reveals how Rome maintained absolute control over its warriors. But before I go any further, let me tell you, I'm on this journey too. I want to know who's feeling the weight and the grandeur of this story. Roman discipline wasn't limited to the battlefield or to exhaustive training. It permeated the smallest details of soldiers' daily lives, as if every gesture, every choice, every item of clothing were part of a larger mechanism. And this is where we begin to understand the true scope of this system. Did you know that even the way you tied your sandals was regulated? It wasn't an exaggeration, it was strategy. Rome believed that visible order reflected internal order, and that a soldier's appearance spoke volumes about his mindset and combat readiness. The sandals, called boots, were not just functional footwear. They represented identity, belonging, and hierarchy. The way they were adjusted, the number of straps, the type of leather, everything followed defined standards. A legionnaire who showed up with poorly laced sandals could be warned or punished. And this wasn't an aesthetic obsession. It was a way to reinforce attention to detail, individual responsibility, and respect for the collective. Behind this requirement lay a powerful logic. If a soldier didn't take care of his own appearance, how could he take care of the training, strategy, and lives of his comrades? Clothing as a whole followed strict norms. The tunic, the belt, the helmet, the shield. Each item had a specific function and a correct way to wear it. The belt, for example, wasn't just for holding up clothing. It symbolized combat readiness. A soldier without a belt was seen as off-duty, vulnerable, almost dishonored. And this shows how Rome used visual symbols to shape behavior. Discipline was not only enforced by direct orders, but by a visual culture that taught, reinforced, and punished. Even body posture was monitored. Shoulders squared, eyes firm, spine erect. All these were part of the image the soldier had to convey. Slouching or showing fatigue in public was not permitted. The idea was simple and brutal. The enemy watches, and weakness begins. In appearance, this mentality created constant pressure, but also a sense of belonging. The soldier knew he was part of something greater, and that his conduct reflected the prestige of the legion. These meticulous rules also had a profound psychological impact. They created a routine, a predictability that helped maintain focus and emotional stability. Amid the chaos of military campaigns, knowing there was a correct way to dress, behave, and present oneself, this gave the soldier an anchor. It was as if external discipline helped organize the internal world. And this connection between appearance and mindset is an important revelation. It shows that Rome not only trained bodies, but also shaped consciences. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because these rules were just the surface of a system of severe punishments that kept everything under control. And understanding how Rome dealt with disobedience is essential to grasping the true impact of military discipline. But before I go any further, comment, that makes sense to me. I want to know who sees this logic behind Roman rigidity. Roman discipline wasn't sustained solely by rigorous training or a well-defined hierarchy. There was a silent but extremely effective force that kept soldiers in line: fear. And not just any fear, an institutionalized, calculated fear, used as a strategic tool to ensure absolute obedience. Punishments within the legions weren't merely corrective. They were symbolic, exemplary, and often cruel. And it is at this point that the hidden truth behind the Roman order begins to reveal itself. Even mild punishments would be considered severe by any modern standard. A simple delay, a lapse in posture, or an inappropriate response to a superior could result in a public flogging, demotion, or loss of privileges. The punished soldier not only suffered physically, he was exposed before his comrades, humiliated, and made an example of. This created a profound psychological impact, reinforcing the idea that any slip-up, no matter how small, could have severe consequences. The mindset that was forming was clear. Making mistakes was not an option. But what truly shaped legionary behavior were severe punishments. And here, Rome spared no expense in brutality. Execution for disobedience, cowardice, or treason was a constant reality. There was no room for mercy. A soldier who abandoned his post or failed to protect the formation could be killed on the spot, without formal trial. And most shockingly, these executions were often carried out by their own legionary companions. This reinforced not only fear, but also collective responsibility. Each man knew that his conduct directly affected the group's survival. Among all the punishments, one stands out for its coldness and psychological impact: Decimatio. When a unit failed severely, whether through desertion, insubordination, or shameful defeat, 1 in 10 soldiers was randomly chosen to die. And it wasn't the enemy, who executed them. It was their own comrades forced to kill their comrades with stones or by beating. This cruel ritual had a clear purpose: to restore discipline through pain, guilt, and trauma. It was a way of saying that the Legion's honor was worth more than any personal bond. And this wrought a brutal transformation in the survivor's mindset. Behind these punishments lay a strategic logic. Rome knew that fear, when well managed, could be a powerful tool. It kept soldiers alert, committed, and ready to act with precision. But it also created a culture of constant vigilance, where each man watched the other, where loyalty was tested daily. Discipline wasn't just vertical, it spread horizontally, creating an invisible network of mutual control. And this made the Legion function like a living organism, where every cell knew its survival depended on the integrity of the whole. The impact of these punishments wasn't limited to the battlefield. It extended to the soldiers' personal lives, the decisions they made, and the way they related to authority. Many carried trauma, physical and emotional scars that stayed with them throughout their journey. But paradoxically, they also carried a sense of belonging, of purpose, of honor won with blood. And it was in this paradox that Rome stood, between glory and terror, between discipline and pain. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's a punishment that goes beyond all limits of military logic and reveals the darkest side of Roman loyalty. But before I go any further, comment, "That makes sense to me." I want to know who's seeing the real weight behind the order that sustained the empire. Decimatio was more than a punishment. It was a ritual of terror, an extreme strategy that revealed the darkest side of Roman discipline. When a military unit committed a serious error, whether through cowardice, desertion, or collective disobedience, the punishment didn't fall solely on the guilty party. Rome believed responsibility was shared, and so it applied a measure that left deep scars on the souls of the survivors. 1 in 10 soldiers was randomly chosen to die, and most cruelly, the execution was carried out by their own legionary companions. Imagine being forced to kill your friend because of his disobedience, or worse, because of the disobedience of someone else you didn't even know well. Decimatio didn't choose the guilty, it chose bodies. The process began with dividing the troop into groups of 10. A drawing of lots decided who would be condemned, and the other 9 were ordered to execute. There were no fancy weapons, no ceremony. It was done with stones, with sticks, with bare hands. The goal wasn't just to punish, it was to traumatize, to break the spirit, to reprogram the troops' mentality. Behind the scenes of this practice lay a cold, calculated logic. Rome knew the fear of death was powerful, but the fear of being killed by the one you loved was devastating. Decimatio created a perverse link between discipline and pain. The soldiers who survived not only obeyed more, they carried the guilt, the weight, the memory. It was a silent transformation, shaping future decisions, reinforcing loyalty not out of honor, but out of dread. And this, cruel as it may seem, worked. The legions that underwent this ritual rarely failed again. The psychological impact was profound. Many soldiers developed trauma, nightmares, and obsessive behaviors, but Rome offered no solace. Pain was seen as part of the journey, as a price to be paid for glory. And this reveals a hidden truth about the empire. Its strength did not come solely from military strategy or technological superiority. It came from the ability to control minds, to manipulate emotions, to use fear as a tool of construction. Decimatio was a constant reminder that, within the legion, there was no room for weakness. This practice also reinforced internal surveillance. Soldiers began to observe each other more closely, with greater scrutiny. Loyalty was no longer limited to the empire. It became a requirement among brothers in arms. Any suspicious behavior, any sign of hesitation, could put everyone at risk. And this created a culture of extreme self-control, where each man became the guardian of collective discipline. Decimatio didn't just punish, it reshaped the emotional makeup of the troops. If until now Roman discipline seemed harsh, almost inhumane, now is the time to understand what made so many men accept this burden with pride. Because behind the rigid rules and severe punishments, there was something that deeply touched the soldiers' souls, the cult of loyalty and courage. And this wasn't just a pretty speech, it was a real force. present in every gesture, every decision, every battle. For the Roman, dying with honor was better than living in shame. This phrase wasn't just a motto. It was a truth that guided the journey of thousands of warriors. Loyalty was the pillar that supported the legionary's identity. He fought not only for Rome, but for his brothers in arms, for his centurion, for the memory of those who had fallen. It was a deep emotional connection, built in the sweat of training, the pain of punishment, and the glory of victories. And this loyalty was constantly reinforced by symbols and rituals that gave meaning to the journey. The soldier knew that by fulfilling his duty bravely, he could achieve recognition, not only among the living, but in the eternity of Roman history. Courage, in turn, was celebrated as a sacred virtue. Fighting wasn't enough. One had to face danger with steadfastness, maintain formation even in the face of death, protect one's comrades even when all seemed lost. And Rome knew how to value these acts. Decorations such as the civic crown, given to anyone who saved the life of a Roman citizen, or ta corona moralis, awarded to the first man to scale the enemy walls, were more than prizes. They were marks of honor that transformed the soldier into a legend. But none were as symbolic as the triumphal crown, reserved for generals who achieved extraordinary victories. Receiving this crown was like touching immortality. Behind the scenes of these tributes lay a powerful emotional strategy. Rome understood that public recognition created a cycle of motivation. Soldiers saw that their courage could be seen, celebrated, and immortalized, and this generated an internal transformation. Pain ceased to be merely suffering. It became part of the path to glory. Death ceased to be an end. It became an honorable sacrifice. This mindset led legionaries to face impossible battles with a conviction that frightened their enemies. They didn't fight just to win. They fought to deserve to be remembered. This culture also influenced decisions within the legion. Many soldiers, even wounded, refused treatment to remain on the front lines. Others volunteered for suicide missions, knowing that if they survived, they would be remembered as heroes. And even those who fell were honored with rituals that reinforced the value of sacrifice. It was as if Rome were saying, "You may die, but your courage will live forever." This created an atmosphere where fear was overcome by honor, where pain was conquered by loyalty, where death was transformed into a legacy. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because understanding this cult of courage helps us see how Rome used emotion as a tool of war. But before I go any further, write this down. I'm on this journey too. I want to know who is feeling the impact of this truth that spans the centuries. This entire structure of discipline, honor, and loyalty we've seen so far didn't exist merely as theory or ideal. It manifested itself concretely and powerfully on the battlefield. It was there, facing the enemy, that the Roman code showed its true strength. And the result? Epic victories that changed the course of history. The Roman army wasn't just numerous. It was precise, calculating, almost surgical in its actions. Each soldier knew exactly what to do, when to do it, and why. There was no room for emotional improvisation. Strategy was the heart of war, and discipline was the lifeblood that made it pulse. The line formation, for example, was one of the legion's trademarks. Soldiers would stand side by side, shields raised, spears ready, creating a nearly impenetrable human wall. And this wasn't just a defensive technique. It was a demonstration of a collective mentality. Each man trusted the other. Every movement was synchronized. And this trust didn't just emerge out of thin air. It was built behind the scenes, through grueling training, severe punishments, and symbolic rewards. It was the code in action, transforming individuals into a unified force. During battles, the hierarchy became even more evident. Centurions shouted orders with absolute authority, and the soldiers obeyed without hesitation. There was no room for doubt, nor for individual decisions. The legion's strength lay precisely in its ability to act as a single body, and this created a devastating impact on enemies. Many barbarian armies, for example, relied on brave but disorganized warriors. When faced with the strategic coldness of the Romans, they were swallowed up by the relentless logic of discipline. Roman strategy also involved bold and intelligent decisions, the use of flanking maneuvers, the creation of ambushes, the construction of temporary fortifications, All of this showed that Rome didn't rely solely on brute force. It valued reasoning, anticipation, and the study of the terrain and enemy behavior. And once again, the code of honor was present. For these strategies to work, each soldier needed to fulfill his role with precision. One mistake, one hesitation, one break in formation, and everything could collapse. Victory depended on fidelity to the plan, the courage to execute it, and the discipline to sustain it to the end. Behind the scenes of these battles, there was also a very strong emotional dimension. The soldiers knew they were fighting not just for Rome, but for their own reputation, their personal honor, and a place in the collective memory. And this made them face extreme situations with almost superhuman determination. They marched for days, braved hostile climates, fought in unfamiliar terrain, and yet they maintained formation, followed orders, and protected one another. It was as if the code was engraved in their bones, guiding every step, every blow, every decision. This combination of strategy and discipline was what made the Roman army so feared and respected. It wasn't just the number of soldiers, nor the power of the weapons. It was the mindset behind each action, a mindset forged in pain, honor, and loyalty. And this had a profound impact, not only on the battlefield, but on the way Rome expanded, dominated, and left its mark on the world. The hidden truth behind Roman victories isn't just in the maps or the numbers. It's in the souls of the men who followed the code with conviction. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because understanding how this discipline manifested itself in combat leads us to see what happened after the war, what remained in the hearts of these warriors. But before I go any further, comment, "That makes sense to me." I want to know who is seeing the real impact of this war machine called Rome. Do we have anything similar to this code of honor today? This question isn't just a historical provocation. It's a reflection on how we view values like loyalty, courage, and discipline today. Because, looking at everything Roman soldiers experienced, from brutal training to the harshest punishments, including the relentless hierarchy and the cult of glory, it's hard not to wonder what remains of this in our society. Is there still a space where honor is more important than comfort, where courage is sincerely celebrated, and where loyalty is so intensely tested? The truth is that however distant the Roman Empire may seem, the principles that sustained its legions still resonate in many places, in risky professions, in communities that value the collective, in people who choose the hardest path out of conviction. The difference is that today many of these decisions are made in silence, far from the battlefields, but they still carry the same emotional weight. And perhaps that's why this topic touches us so much, because it reveals a part of human nature that remains alive, the desire to belong, to serve something greater, to leave a legacy. The impact of this code lies not only in military victories or conquered frontiers. It lies in the transformation it wrought in each man who followed it. It was a journey that began with pain, involved difficult decisions, and ended, often, with sacrifice. But there was also glory, recognition, and a deep sense of purpose. And this is something that, even today, remains one of the greatest human quests: to find meaning in what we do, to feel that our actions have value, that our courage is seen, that our loyalty is reciprocated. Behind the scenes of this story, there are revelations that go beyond war. There are lessons about leadership, about resilience, about the power of collectivity, and perhaps most importantly, about how discipline can be a bridge between chaos and order, between fear and action, between instinct and conscious choice. The Roman code wasn't perfect, far from it, but it shows us that when values are taken seriously, they have the power to shape destinies. And this applies to empires as well as individuals. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because understanding the emotional legacy these soldiers carried after the war helps us see what truly remained when silence replaced battle cries. But before I go any further, comment, "That makes sense to me." I want to know who's reflecting with me on what honor means today. If you've made it this far, you've already realized that this dive into the mindset of Roman warriors goes far beyond history. It's about choices, values, and the impact certain codes leave on the souls of those who live them. If this journey resonated with you, If at any point you found yourself reflecting on courage, discipline, or loyalty, leave a like. It shows that this connection was worthwhile. And if you want to continue following content that provokes this kind of reflection, subscribe to the channel. This is where we continue exploring the behind the scenes of history with depth and purpose. Oh, and if you stayed until the end, comment below. I'm with you until the end. It's always good to know who's walking this journey with you. There's a video here that complements this topic. Click and follow me there. The story still has much to reveal.